Hello, my menopause bestie. How you doing? I hope everything is great under the sun where you're at. If you've been watching on YouTube, you see I'm wearing two different outfits because I record the intro after I interview the guest. So go to YouTube. Sometimes it's kind of fun to see these things. You wouldn't know this if you're just listening on a podcast. So what's happening in our world in June? We're having a giveaway in the Biohacking Menopause membership group. If you're not a member yet, jump in. It's a wonderful group of supportive women. And this month, we have a chance to win Karen Martell's facial cream with natural bioidentical estrogens. It's got some estradiol, some estriol, vitamin E, aloe vera, a lot of great stuff, and none of those nasties, because Karen is a biohacker and she only wants non-toxic ingredients while still being safe and efficacious. And we've done some great podcasts together, so go back and listen to those. I will have links to the giveaway at the menopause group in the show notes, so go there. But you got to join by July 1st to be able to win some of these creams. Now, our guest today is Hannah Wendt, and we talk about biological age kits and testing. Keep in mind, she's a little biased. She's the founder of TruDiagnostic. So I always like to just put things in perspective for you guys, right? Whenever we interview somebody who's got something to sell, just keep that in the back of your mind. I still love TruDiagnostic. It's a kit that I take. It's my preferred biological testing kit. It's very comprehensive. It's really thorough, and it's great service as well too. So yeah, I'm a fan. But we wanted to not just talk about TruDiagnostic. We wanted to talk about biological age tests in general and the variety that are out there, and what are the differences with them? What is the research that shows in general what's happening to a woman as she's going into the menopause transition? What does their database show is happening to a woman's biological age as they're passing into this menopause? And can we delay menopause? We talked about a kit that would detect when will menopause arrive. And she shared some really interesting data that they picked up in her own work on how to optimize menopause too, what they've been seeing they've been the most effective strategies. So really fun conversation. So who's Hannah Wendt? Well, she's young, but she knows a lot and is much wiser than her years because she's been interested in longevity and technology since she was really, really young. And she studied at the University of Kentucky and she graduated with a degree in biology. And during that time, she had multiple research internships studying cell signaling and cell biology. And then after her graduation, she worked for the International Peptide Society as their director of research and content. So, shoot, we should have been talking about peptides as well. Yeah, we'll have to do another recording with her just focusing on peptides. That would be super cool. And so she's been working in this integrative medicine industry for a while, and she then later had an opportunity to get involved in methylation-based age diagnostics, and she started TruDiagnostic with an S in 2020, and she's going to explain what methylation is. So don't worry. And just to give a little background on TruDiagnostic, it's a company that uses methylation markers and diagnostics for life extension and preventative healthcare. And they mostly work with functional medicine providers, but they also serve normal human beings like you and me. And we're going to talk more about that in this episode. And she's got a special opportunity only for the Hack My Age community. So stay on until the very end. And Hannah, she's also created a little really cool side business called Everything Epigenetics, where she totally geeks out and she shares some insights on how DNA regulation has an impact on our health. And she's got a podcast on all this too. So if you're an epigenetic fan, go and check that out. So now let's just get started with the show. Well, it's a real pleasure today to have Hannah Wendt from TruDiagnostics. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Zora. I'm excited to chat with you and have your listeners learn a little bit more about what we do.
We were so lucky to have you with the Biohacking Menopause membership group, and you gave our ladies some really great tips and answered all of their questions privately, but in a pretty private, it's intimate group. So it's really nice to have you there, and I hope to have you on there again as well when we have more different ladies too. So one thing I want to start with is because we're going to talk about biological age test kits. A lot of women are confused about this. Let's just explain what is this kit for and what it means to a woman in this menopause transition.
Yeah, absolutely. So biological age tests are super, super important. There are many biological age tests right now, and I'll specifically, talk about the markers that I look at to study this called, epigenetics, which we can get into that definition as well. But just in general, biological age tests are so important because regardless of where you are in your journey as a woman, aging is the number one risk factor for all cause mortality and morbidity. So basically means if you look at aging, that can predict your risk for every single disease and even death. So it's that biggest risk factor. That way, focusing on aging is critical. And one statistic that I recently learned that I think is great and puts this into perspective is, even if you had a magical pill that cured cancer, that cured heart disease completely, they just don't exist anymore. Two of the top killers in the US, you only add 7 years to the end of your life. And that's lifespan, not even health span, right? As
That's
people continue to
crazy.
get old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, is it worth all of this effort that we're doing to live 7 more years?
Well,
I don't know.
exactly. And I think I like to start off with even that statistic as well, because I think it puts it into perspective, right? It truly is more about that healthy medicine, that health span rather than lifespan, and not necessarily being afraid of becoming diseased, but just preventing to the point that we don't get there.
Yeah, and I bet actually when you're getting up there, you want 7 years. That's going to be pretty significant because we
Right.
don't feel it, as at our age. But when you get there, you you really go, I changed my mind. It's actually really important. One more year is probably really important, unless you have a really poor quality of life, and that's another story.
Exactly. You want that healthy year, those healthy years added to the end of your life, right? Where you don't spend those extra 7 years in a hospital bed, miserable, not being able to live your life, but you're spending those 7 years surrounded by people you love, your family, quality time, watching, grandkids, starting a new business if you wanted to, right? Getting a
Mhm,
puppy, taking, that puppy on a walk, and really enjoying life at its fullest, and then peacefully, as
mhm,
odd as it sounds to say, have eating your favorite meal and, passing away during your sleep, right? Or something like
mhm.
that, more of a peaceful way to go rather than being quite traumatic. So I think that's really the end goal here is really aging gracefully. And how are we able to do that? Well, you have to quantify where you are first. And that's where this biological age testing really comes into play.
And so yeah, definitely it makes sense as we get older too, we probably have more markers that we need to look at because if you're just born, you're still aging, right? But probably a lot slower than we are when we're in our 50s. So it makes perfect sense. And there's so many tests that we, do. It can be really, really confusing. And I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit the differences because we have the glycans and methylation and we have telomeres and we have so many things. Like what do you think, can you just explain some of these differences and what when maybe we should test with which?
For sure, absolutely. And they're all different measurements. You can make a biological age test out of essentially anything. I can say, hey, Zora, run from point A to point B. I'm going to time you and I'm going to put it in an equation and then we're going to create a biological age off of it, right? Probably doesn't mean much because there's no scientific evidence or validity in there. But essentially, we're looking at epigenetics or DNA methylation. And to put that quite plainly, we're looking at your genetic expression levels. And what we've really learned is that those levels are highly predictive of outcomes. That is really my top priority when using these tests, because if they're not predictive of outcomes, then again, you're not going to actually get feedback on really what to change. And it's not going to make a clinical impression on you. And that's, again, really the goal. There are tests that measure epigenetics, DNA methylation that I focus on. There are tests that look at glycans, which again is a different measurement that I think may be actually a little bit more indicative of like inflammatory status and hormone levels. So, these tests can be useful for different things. And then telomeres, which, haven't proven to be as related and predictive of diseases now, but again, may offer a little bit more insight actually into a senescent cell burden. So each of these clocks have some strengths, each of them have some weaknesses, but, there's a checklist of items I'll go through when I'm reading new studies saying, we can reverse biological age, or we saw a change in biological age. I'll look at the clock they used, and if they don't meet that threshold that I walk through, I'm tossing the paper. I'm not reading it. So things like, again, is it a published clock? Is it predictive of outcomes? Is it precise? Does it tell you why you're aging? Do we know how that clock is created? And, there's a couple more, but just to name a few, you kind of want to give them like a sniff test, right? Like,
Yeah.
are these legitimate clocks, or is something not really aligning here? And if you can't find any of those things that I named, something might be a little bit off when looking into it.
We should probably explain what is biological age. We just assume everybody knows it. And it's actually a lot of people don't know the difference between biological and
Yeah.
chronological age.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. We get so excited to talk about these subjects. I'm not for really jumping right in, but biological age is this idea that everyone on this planet is aging individually at a cellular level. It's completely different than your chronological age. Chronological age being how long you've been on this earth. It can only increase, it can only go up. But we also know that people who age chronologically, people, let's say, who are 50, some people look really young, some people look really, really old. So we know chronological age isn't a good marker to assess true health. So that's what we're talking about when I mean biological age, is this cellular variation of aging that we can now quantify with those different measurements like epigenetics, DNA methylations, through different tests that are all going to be capturing different parts of how we're actually aging.
What does the research show in terms of what someone may look like older or younger than their chronological age? Is it coinciding?
Yeah, it is. Again, I always say you can't really tell how someone is aging by looking at them. I mean, you can get some hints. There's, one epigenetic clock. And by clock, I just mean, again, specific positions we put together that are then algorithmic to predict an outcome, called the Dunedin pace, or pace of aging. And they have this really cool image. I can send it to you, Zora, to show your listeners, where they line up people who were in this cohort that are all 45 years old. They were all born in 1972 and 1973. But people who have a faster, what we call pace of aging, I mean, just physically look way older compared to those who have an average pace of aging, we call it, and a slower pace of aging. So for that particular algorithm and epigenetic clock, absolutely, it's correlated. Some of the others, not so much. It depends on the algorithm, but that one is one of my favorites to talk about, just because of how connected it is and correlated to quality of life-based metrics.
That's super important. So I'm wondering then you said, you mentioned that there's some of the differences in these different types of biological age test kits. There, you need this criteria. So, and we did talk about in our menopause group, we talked about accuracy, because my question to you was, are these accurate? And I really liked your answer, so maybe we can share what you said.
Yeah, I love this question too. I think it just acts as a really good learning opportunity for, again, the differences between everything that's out there. So my answer to Zora when she asked me this question initially was, hey, we don't want these biological age clocks to be accurate. When you're trying to predict something on a 1-to-1 ratio, you do want accuracy. But accuracy if you think of a dartboard, it's getting to that bullseye. You're trying to hit something that is known. And the biological aging process is extremely unknown, right? We can't just kind of guess at that and hit a target. So we instead like to ask the question, are these biological age clocks precise? Meaning, again, if we're using the dartboard example, think about hitting the top left-hand quadrant of the dartboard, and you're hitting that quadrant in the same exact place every single time you throw a dart. So what we do to actually measure that is a fancy bioinformatics term called ICC, or interclass correlation coefficient, meaning, hey, if you take our test and you take it at the same exact time and you take two samples from your body, how highly correlated are they to one another? And we've measured that with internal studies. External groups have validated that as well for each of those kind of epigenetic biological age clocks. And we're very, very precise. You want a value above like zero point 0.9 at least. We have about 0.95 or higher on all of those outcomes. So it really, really kind of zones in that variance that you may see from clocks that don't have that data published on it.
How interesting. Yeah, because when you say we were talking about TruDiagnostic, and that's the biological age test kit that is different than the others. And so when you would say, do other companies do this ICC and test and make sure that they're accurate? And how do we know? Like if you wanted to go and buy some, 3 different test kits and just not that I don't think we should do that, because I think I'll just stick with one. But I know people who do that. And yeah, how would we know? And would we just ask them?
Yeah, 100%. I think asking can't hurt, right? The answer is always no, or I don't know until we actually ask. So yeah, for anyone who you can't really locate the algorithm or any of the accuracy or prediction based data, depending on again what the biological clock is trying to predict for the outcome, just shoot them a quick message to their support team and say, "Hi, I'm really interested in your test. I would love some precision data. Do you have an interclass correlation coefficient that you can send me alongside of the publication?" I think that's super important, that it's not only internal, but there's some external validation there as well.
What about, let's talk about methylation, because that's what True Diagnostic tests. And maybe we need to explain what is methylation and then why do you choose to measure this as opposed to other things?
Yeah. So, let me define even maybe epigenetics too, if that's okay, Zora, to start, right? So epigenetics, epi is a Greek prefix. It means above or on top of. So we're really looking on top of the genome. And we know the genome's stagnant. You're not going to change that throughout your lifetime. But the epigenetics is really talking about the modifications we can have, including all of this nurture we're getting. So our interactions with the environment, our behavior, how we slept last night, what we ate for breakfast, the coffee I just had this morning, the water I'm drinking now. It's literally everything. Epigenetics is 80% of your health outcomes, where your genetics is just that 20%. So we're learning that we're now in control, because unlike the genetics, your epigenetics are going to be modifiable by those lifestyle choices I just mentioned, and supplements, medications, procedural based therapies as well.
Can I
So
ask one thing? Can I interrupt for one
yeah,
second?
please do.
Because, as a gerontologist, I always quote this as well, 80, 80, 20. Sometimes I hear 90, 10, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just what's important is that we are able to control a lot of things that we thought were genes in our destiny and we couldn't do anything about it. And I think that's very important. But what are your thoughts on those outliers who don't do anything they're supposed to do, and they're smoking and drinking and eating poor poor diet and not exercising, but they outlive everybody else. And you think,
Mhm.
well, okay, the guy is or woman has got terrible lifestyle, but those 20% or that 10% is very powerful. What do you think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good thought exercise to really go through. I mean, the 10 to 20% is still there, right? That still counts for something. So you could have those longevity genes, right? Where you do have people in your family living to 100, 110, but you're not making the best lifestyle choices. And in that particular case, Sora, we would actually see people have increased biological aging. We can actually quantify how much someone smokes cigarettes. It's more accurate than their self-reported smoking status. We can even tell people how much they've been drinking, and that kind of impression it leaves on their epigenome. So we would actually receive their sample and see all of these awful results, right, from an epigenetic standpoint. But they may have, and I don't know the particular genomic locations or SNPs off the top of my head, but they may have very favorable variants there. So, in that case, we still would say yes, 80%. I mean, you would think that that would pick up and drive a lot of it, but really sometimes that 20% can still pull through. So it's very rare. Do we see that just because people who do take our testing are going to be really healthy and people who want to optimize? But every now and then we do get someone who, slips in and says, oh, I just wanted to see almost how bad it was, right? I know I'm not living the lifestyle I should be. But what's really cool about our testing is people get the baseline and they do realize, oh crap, I am aging, right? I like, this is actually really bad for me. And then it usually ignites a change in their habitual routine or their habits.
It'd be really cool if you had a timeline, just say, based on this data, you're going to die at 82 or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I
So
know
we
that's really
have
scary for
that.
people to think, but
Yeah,
what?
we have that with the new data we just released with Harvard. We don't report out on it,
Oh,
right? Um, but yeah, with a 92% accuracy rate within a 5-year window, predicting death, essentially.
but you would give a number, like your number is, 74 or 62, or I don't
You
remember
would.
that. That's new because
Yeah.
I
We
didn't have
don't
that
give
when I
it.
did it.
Yeah, we
Oh,
don't
you
give it.
don't.
We
Oh,
don't give it. We could
if
do it, but we
if
don't
we
give
want
it.
it, can we have it?
I could pull it for you. It's a really hard kind of mathematical and bioinformatics process to even really
Okay.
pull the number. But like, of course, the one piece of feedback we get, well, what if I go and get hit by a car or struck by lightning, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. We know that, right? We're not accounting for kind of absolute risk with everything. But yeah, the markers are getting really, really good and predictive.
Cool. So yeah, I want to see that number. You should probably make it optional. Do you want to see
Yeah.
that number or not? And what about, so let's go back to methylation. Let's and
Yeah.
epigenetics. Sorry, I
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
interrupt
So
you.
no worries, no worries. So, we define epigenetics, define genetics. Again, those are like either working together, they can kind of push and pull, like you mentioned. Most of the time, 20% being nurture, we would say that genetics, 80% being nature. But then under your epigenetics, think of it as an umbrella. We have all these different types of DNA modification. And again, what we're measuring at TruDiagnostic is that DNA methylation. Basically meaning if something's methylated, teeny, teeny CH3 group, it's a carbon and 3 hydrogens, just a little molecule. If that is present, if you're methylated, you have more methylation, hypermethylation, that particular location or that gene is going to be turned off. It's going to be less expressed. And same is true of the opposite. If that little CH3 group, that methylation marker is absent, then your gene is going to be turned on and more expressed. So it's really about what I like calling shifting these markers in your favor. You don't want everything shut off, right? We want our tumor suppressor genes unmethylated and turned on, and you don't want everything turned on either, or you would go into overdrive where you have, cancer genes turned on and other, unwanted favorable things turned on. So there's a really healthy balance, and you reach that with those lifestyle factors and other things that are in your control.
Oh, sorry. That's why you wanted to look at the methylation and understand what's going on. It's quite an amazing way to see, I guess, what's turned on, what's turned off. But just so people know, this is not a DNA test. Okay. We're not pulling, spitting in a tube and, you know, looking at your genes. We're looking at the epigenetics on how they're behaving or what's to contribute to the algorithm that you have to help us understand how fast we're aging or how slow. And you've got so many other things too that you measure that I haven't seen in other kits. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and then how someone can interpret this.
Yeah, that's great. And to go off that point too, Zora, before I answer your question directly, a lot of people hear methylation and they're like, MTHFR gene, right? That's a SNP, that's a single nucleotide polymorphism. That is a gene. So yes, there is a methylation pathway, and there is a really popular gene where you can be a poor methylator or be, a good methylator. So there are connections and correlations with actually DNA methylation and epigenetics, but they're two separate processes. So that is such a great point that you bring up. Now, to really answer your question, what else? I'm a huge advocate for just epigenetics as a biomarker and not even necessarily biological aging. So I get so excited because epigenetics, it's all happening and unfolding in front of our face right now. It's really causing a massive paradigm shift in not even traditional lab testing. I would go as far to say medicine itself. We are starting to see epigenetics even replace traditional laboratory values. We can predict over 4,000 clinical lab values, metabolites, and proteins with a 1-to-1 ratio and about a 97% accuracy rate. And you're getting all of that information just from a blood spot card, right? Fairly cheap as well. And you're getting all of that information delivered to you at one time instead of going to all of these labs,
Yeah,
right?
and pulling out a bunch of blood out of your arm. Some people don't like needles. I mean, you prick your finger, but it's nothing compared to a blood test. But I'm just wondering, I've interviewed people who just not fans of biological test kits. They just think, well, you can find everything you need in blood. It's okay. It's good enough. What do you think about that? Should we, if somebody had to choose one or the other, is there something better or not or worse?
I think in terms of if you have to make a choice, it depends on what you want to look at, right? If you really do want to measure like hormone levels and know if you're deficient in those areas, right? Then you need to do the lab testing, the blood testing, because that's where you're interested. If you want to measure your number one risk factor, though, and really understand how you're aging, that's what the epigenetic testing is for. And I think you can use them very beautifully together. We don't have the 4,000 biomarkers I mentioned available quite yet. That's really more research that we're working on. So in the future, I would say, hey, you can get everything by just testing your epigenetics. But right now, you have to choose one depending on the outcome. Epigenetics leaning more toward that aging still, or do both of them in tandem. Because guess what? If you put your lab values in optimal ranges, you're going to have better biological aging as well.
Let's talk about some of the data that you gather from, I don't know how many people are in your database already. Do you know that number?
Yeah. We've tested around 50,000 people. So in the
Wow.
4.5 years we've been open, and there are going to be about 20,000 women. So a little bit more men compared to women.
Hmm.
But about 80% of those women, which I knew you were interested in, are going to be above 40.
Okay, yeah, that's my next question. Yeah, so let's hear what's happening to a woman's biological age or methylation or whatever it is you want to talk about as she's passing through menopause. I don't know if you get women who test before menopause, maybe in their perimenopause, and then once they've hit menopause. Do you have any data on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have some data, and I pulled one result and have an interesting case study I can go over as well. I think though going back to even a research paper though that I always like to go back to what's even published to start. So I can start there, or I can go into the case studies. Or what would you
Yeah, actually,
prefer?
yeah, let's talk about what the data shows in general. What is science,
Okay.
research is showing first, and then I would love to know what's going on with the women who are taking your test kit because they are two different populations. Like you said, there may be women with a certain profile who are maybe generally healthy testing, and we want to hear what all the other women are happening to them.
Yeah, definitely. So there was a menopause study. Again, I think this was back in like 2016, which is crazy. And there really hasn't been any updated since then. So we need to get a cohort together and do this research because that's just not okay. But this study was done by Dr. Steve Horvath and Dr. Morgan Levine, who are like the aging DNA methylation epigenetic experts, and they tracked methylation from more than about 3,100 women and enrolled in 4 larger kind of cohorts and studies. So the DNA samples included those from women who were in the Women's Health Initiative study, which is a really long 15-year research program that addresses really common causes of death, disability, poor quality of life in postmenopausal women. All right. So we looked at the biological aging from all of these women, about 3,100 I mentioned, to explore that relationship that we're so interested in and asking about between their chronological age, biological age, where they are kind of in their menopause journey. And they really discovered that menopause speeds up biological aging in some really early clocks by about an average of 6%. All right. So it doesn't sound like much, but it does add up, right, over a woman's lifespan. We were talking about that at the beginning already. So take, for example, a woman who enters early menopause at age 42, right? 8 years later, her body would be a full year older biologically than another 50-year-old woman who entered menopause naturally at age 50, right? So the younger a woman is when she enters menopause, the faster her blood is going to age. And that's super significant because a person's blood may mirror what's happening in other parts of the body, right? Which could have implications for outcomes. So I don't even think, Zora, I addressed your question at the beginning, like what can this do for people who are going through menopause or, where they're at in that journey is they may be able to even test their biological age, understand that it's a little bit older before they're even entering into menopause, but then try and postpone menopause as much as possible to slow down that aging a little naturally as well. So yeah, it's interesting. There are a couple other studies out there. I think that's the most popular one. There's like a twin study as well. Again, just showing even a 3.7 year older kind of average difference in women going through menopause.
So yeah, we're just aging faster as we lose our hormones, and that's kind
Right.
of scary. So that's why these test kits are. It's good to see if you can make a change and slow down the menopause transition or make it easier somehow, and then you can see again, is it helping or not? But it should technically, you should be aging slower by taking good care of yourself anyways. And then hormone replacement is a whole other can of worms, but that's pretty cool. So that's what you're seeing in the research. And what about the women in your database? And maybe you want to explain like what's the profile so we can get an idea what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So we've tested about 20,000 women at True. About 80% of them are above 40. So we're usually testing both men and women, really, who are in the ages between 40 and 60. I would say primarily. The kind of women taking the True Diagnostic test, most of them are going to be of European descent. We actually have a really good representation of Asian population as well, and then Latin American would be next. So a pretty good chunk, a lot of healthcare providers around those areas who are bringing a lot of patients in. They're going to be pretty health conscious, right? They're going to probably be of a higher socioeconomic level because they're really going to care about their health. Again, they're treating aging as a disease. The test isn't something I feel like you can just kind of pay for from a paycheck every week. I mean, you have to have probably a larger amount of income just because it's still a little bit more expensive.
Is it
Um,
going to come
Right.
down in price one day? Oh, actually, it already has. I think since I talked to Ryan Smith on our first episode. So,
Yeah.
and then hopefully all these kits. I mean, before to test and just the DNA was $1 million or something when it first came out, and now it's much more affordable. People can do this, but yeah, I think your plan hopefully will be to make them even more accessible to the general population. No?
100%. So we have some pretty large advancements there. I think by the end of this year, I'm thinking beginning of Q4, I don't think it'll be any earlier. The test to consumers and healthcare providers will go down. I think to consumers, it'll be around $200 or cheaper. And that's like a $300 cut because of this new infrastructure. I told someone this the other day and they were like, because of AI. And I said, no, just because of a manufacturing kind of infrastructure change where that's, where most of our cost falls. So we're really, really excited to start bringing this out to the masses.
So exciting. I'm happy for that. Then, what about then the data that what are you seeing with
Yeah.
these women now?
We
Because we know their
see
profile already. Like that's how we got to keep in mind, ladies, that we're talking about a certain type.
Yeah, we unfortunately see the same stuff in that research. That research I do want to preface by saying they use older epigenetic clocks, which have like some issues, some precision, don't move in ways we would expect sometimes. And again, TruDiagnostic, we're testing with way better clocks, that are what we call second and third generation and really related to outcomes. So regarding trends that we see in the TruDiagnostic cohort and data, for women in peri and post menopause, we see increases across the board for almost every single marker, unfortunately. Even that pace of aging I mentioned, that tends to increase. And there's no publications on this, but there is a publication on the Dunedin Pace paper talking about certain stressors regarding pregnancy, severe COVID-19, and even unelected and elected surgeries, saying, hey, we do see the pace of aging increase during those stressors, but it actually decreases back to baseline or even further after that stress passes.
Really? That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and that's maybe hinting at some of the, maybe the case study that I'll bring up here soon as well. But think of menopause then, with what your audience is super familiar with as being a massive stressor on the body, but again, being able to control for that eventually with intervention, with the right plan. It's a very personalized to you, but we may be able to see some changes.
Do you have any data on women who are on hormone therapy and women who are not?
Yeah, we absolutely do. There's a published paper actually by Dr. again Steve Horvath as the main principal investigator on it, talking about higher testosterone and testosterone estradiol ratio. That's associated with better epigenetic estimators of mortality risk. And again, the more that you can kind of delay even the onset of menopause, obviously we. As I mentioned with that research earlier, you're going to see better epigenetic aging as well. So that is, probably one of the recommendations that we may
Mhm.
be able to make. You can get into that whole can of worms too, but that can really vary on a wide range of things, age, sex, overall health, if it's the right time for you, what your healthcare provider believes in. But we're starting to gather a lot more data on HRT, just because most of, again, our healthcare providers are using that. And I keep mentioning healthcare providers because that is who our primary, users are. We mainly work with them as well in selling these kits.
Yeah, and not to mention, well, your audience so far is a woman going through perimenopause, but I always say menopause also starts in childhood. It does what you do throughout your life, the life course will affect the way you transition through this and then eventually how you age. So it's a just focusing on the female population in general, no matter how what age you are, it's really nice to see how hormones affect your aging process. So I'm excited to see more data on that in the future. So let's so the trends, what are the trends that you're seeing with these women in peri and post menopause? I mean, do you see any?
Just in terms of our testing, to be
Yeah.
clear.
Just in terms of
Yeah,
your testing, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So, there was they'll follow this same trend, but women who are taking our testing, they're experiencing, menopause symptoms. They're usually going to be older biologically. I would say maybe a couple years, give or take, even 4 to 6. You see that Dunedin kind of increased as well. The Dunedin I like to use better in kind of these use case scenarios because the Dunedin is more of what's currently happening. It's like a 3 to 6 month running average, where like these larger biological ages are more like capturing everything across your entire lifetime. So when you're doing intervention and changing things rather quickly, and Dunedin pace is really good for N of one precision based medicine. So yeah, we're usually going to see biological age clocks, unfortunately, increased across the board. Even if someone tests before they go through menopause, they may be younger or, maybe, a little bit decreased and then see increases for perimenopause.
But are there any other things that you see are trending with these women, other than it kind of makes sense. You get older and okay, you're
Yeah.
gonna and it eventually, yeah, you age faster. I can understand that trend, but I'm wondering women are, I don't know if there's any other
Yeah.
trends going on.
There are, yeah, yeah. So to maybe extrapolate, just when we dive into the data a little bit more, I was looking into all these individual components we report out on. We're seeing a lot of inflammation, right? A lot of oxidation. So makes sense. You're going to get a lot of oxidative stress through kind of that process. As women get older in general, I know this is something that's well known in your audience is probably familiar with, is we're starting to lose a lot of muscle mass and bone density. So we have a clock that actually predicts your physical fitness levels, your VO2 max, FEV1, grip strength, and gait speed. Sometimes those can look a little bit weaker through this time point as well. Um, Going back to some stress markers, right? We have senescent cell kind of indicators on our test that may look a little bit higher because of that oxidative stress and that inflammation-based process. So again, things that we would expect are also being validated when we look back at the data on this test. And I think, again, that shows how promising the epigenetics can be in measuring it. And it's something that's also, again, quantifiable, saying, hey, doesn't look so great right now, but let's start to make these lifestyle changes, which I also have some data on, and then get better outcomes.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear next is when you get someone who's testing and then retesting and then tell you what their protocol is or isn't, and then what are you seeing from there?
Yeah. So in the case, for let's keep going with this like avatar, right? This middle-aged women, maybe going through menopause or certain symptoms. They take the test, they're a little bit older. What should they do? Right. And I think again, very specific. I'm not a healthcare provider, so take this with a grain of salt. But what the data shows and what we've seen before and after, so of course, more of that hormone replacement therapy we think is huge and really going to drive the biggest change. But under that, it's all lifestyle changes, right? There's the Mediterranean diet. There's dietary approaches to stop hypertension, which is going to help with the inflammation, with the oxidative stress. It's very anti-inflammatory. It's very antioxidant. More physical activity, more stress management, your sleep hygiene, your social engagement, right? That's how those blue zones really stay as healthy as possible, as old as possible as time goes on, is that social engagement piece. But supplement wise too, I like to be very, very simple and not overcomplicate. So do the basics to support the process, such as omega-3 fatty acids. They're going to help with heart health during that process. Vitamin D, calcium, those are going to be really important for bone health during menopause as well. So I know that's very simple. I don't like to overcomplicate that, especially during a strenuous period in a woman's life. So I think those would be my top recommendations and really key, and what we see actually reverse the biological age and make the biggest difference.
Yes, I really wanted to know. Yeah, is it, well, it sounds like what you're testing is matching with the research that we know already, that all these great lifestyle changes are working for you. And wow, could you imagine if you were behaving, I guess, like in the blue zone, and then you and then you did HRT on top of it? Like, I wonder what those people, how long they would live in a good condition. And because it definitely does play a factor, and that's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I had another question, but I totally forgot.
Okay.
It'll come back to me. So, all right, then let's talk about a woman in perimenopause, because we know that in perimenopause, it's really hard to test blood and where am I in this journey? And it goes up and it's down. It could be up in the morning and down by the evening. So it's a really hard predictor for menopause, or at least, I think women want to know, when is menopause gonna happen? And I'm wondering, what your thoughts are on a woman in perimenopause testing her biological age, and what can that give her?
Yeah, yeah. I think, again, anytime is the right time. You know, Perimenopause, when we talk about that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that's going to be the transitional period, right? Leading up to menopause, kind of marks the end of our reproductive years. And it can begin several years before menopause, I believe, when the ovaries start to produce less estrogen. can vary in length, but last a few months. I think it can last maybe up to 10 years. I was doing some research on this but beforehand, and could be when someone's in their 40s chronologically, or even start in late 30s as well. So this is a really critical time, I think, in a woman's life. So coming back to what this testing can actually do for someone, what it can really do is maybe five things. If I want to generalize this a little bit more, we can go into either one of them, but it's an overall health status evaluation, right? Are you closer to going through perimenopause, or are you closer to going through menopause in your late 30s or in your 40s, right? If you're aging biologically faster, you may be at risk for earlier menopause, right? We see that connection, that correlation. Two, lifestyle modifications, right? It can help you change lifestyle modifications if you're older. Three, you're monitoring hormonal health. So we know that those are all related, and those hormonal fluctuations can have a significant impact on your overall health. So biological age testing is a way to indirectly measure that, but you also want to do your hormone testing alongside. Four, your tailored health interventions, meaning if you are older, let's start maybe some of that HRT or some of those recommendations we mentioned. And then five, what we're starting to learn more and more about, the early detection of disease, right? If you are aging faster. So those are just some, I think, reasons why women should test their biological age if they're in that perimenopause state.
I remembered my question. So I'm going to give you two questions now, just so I don't forget. So the first one that I wanted to ask is because you mentioned all these lifestyle changes that we know that are good for our methylation and it's good for our aging. What about if somebody is overtraining or over-exercising? Because we know all these things that are hormetic stressors are good up to a certain point. And then the second question, I want to confirm if I understood correctly, is that are you seeing that women who are doing hormone therapy are actually delaying menopause? Like, can you see, do you ask the women, so, did you go into menopause? Like, I'm not sure how you even measure that, but I want to see if I understood correctly.
Yeah, sorry, say that question again. You want to.
So you kind of alluded to when a woman does certain exercise,
Yep.
certain lifestyle changes and
Overtraining.
hormone therapy, if I understood correctly, she can delay menopause.
Mhm.
And then
Correct.
how would you know? Because we don't really know when we're going to go in menopause. And we can't, as far
Right.
as I understand, there's no predictor of, okay, here's the data and your blood work or whatever it is that they need. And then you're scheduled. I mean, I don't know, your genes are telling you that you're going to get
Yeah.
menopause at 45 or something, and we can maybe shift that. I'm wondering if I understood correctly.
Now, no, now it makes sense. I'm glad I asked for a little bit of clarification there. What so again, I guess the answer is you don't know, right? You don't know that you're actually pushing it back. What you could do though is create an epigenetic clock to predict when someone should go through menopause, right? If we had enough data. So I think we could actually make a clock or make a predictor of that in the future. Which I don't know why I have never thought of that as I'm
Eh,
doing my research and my prep for this conversation. But if you had, yeah, women who absolutely know kind of they go through menopause and you get their blood sample at that time, and can identify certain symptoms of perimenopause and work that out and kind of create a clock that way, I think you could do it eventually.
I'm putting in my order because I think that's a really cool idea. But you'd have to take into consideration that women are officially in menopause, but yet they're still having perimenopausal symptoms. And then there's women going through perimenopause and they have blood work showing that they're actually in menopause. So it's such a big it would be really hard to do, but it would be really interesting because I think that's kind of what a woman would know is more or less, like, it's kind of like predicting your death. Not that menopause is death, but it's that, ooh, there's a number. And then we know maybe we die at that time or not, it's around that time. It's as a predictor. So yeah, it would be cool to know, when menopause is going to hit. But on the other side, and when I'm thinking about it, it's not the menopause. Very often when women hit menopause and then soon after, that's when things stabilize and they feel better. It's that perimenopause part that's the hardest. So,
Got it.
but if you were, say, 20 or 30, you were kind of curious when you may hit, because then it would give you a clue about perimenopausal symptoms. Because if you did a test kit where you said, oh, I should be getting into perimenopause, I mean, yeah, perimenopause, say 45, that when you're 35 with anxiety and depression or stress or whatever it is, then you could at least go, huh, am I, do I need an antidepressant or do I need some hormones? It would be a bit more clear where to start. And well, I would always think start with hormones better than antidepressant medication. And if that doesn't solve the problem, you can always move on. But, I mean, you get what I mean?
I love that. Yeah, totally. I totally get what you mean. And, I didn't even put that together, right? Like, oh, if you are feeling more anxious or depressed, yeah, is that because of perimenopause? Like, right? Like, what's the root cause? So, I think that's super, super interesting. And I do think you're right. I think it seems like there's like some gray area or some overlapping of these terms and these like, markers and what are we really seeing? So in order to create a clock, you probably would need to have a little bit more of defined like phases or terms, which I think, should be given to women. We deserve that and need to understand what's happening to our bodies at what specific point. So I think that could only help bring attention to this research, which is also very limited to begin with.
Yeah, menopause needs a rebrand. Nobody likes that word. And very often when we're talking about menopause, when we start talking about it, it's because we're in perimenopause. So yeah, but anyways, so okay, so what about that first question that came to my head is in terms of other hormetic stressors like exercise? Do you see people who are doing it too much and you're like, oh, we gotta take it down because you're getting too much stress in the body?
We do. Yeah, yeah. It's like, myself, I run just naturally like higher stress, more anxiety. I work a lot, but I enjoy it. But it's definitely, a stressor that can kind of go too far. I love working out. So I do have a lot of oxidative stress. So in that case, I can see fluctuations in my personal biological age and really denote it to that. I just do some extra antioxidants. I really like the sulforaphane, the broccoli extract, and really take downtime to relax, breathing exercises, meditation. So you can see that too much exercise can overstimulate the body and thus increases those aging clocks.
So yeah, you are seeing that too. Interesting. Is there an optimal time to test? Women who are thinking about their blood testing, and you're in this, and when you're cycling, you go, oh, we have to do it at a certain time of our cycle. What about the biologic, your true diagnostic?
Yeah, I don't think there is any research on that quite yet. Just test, right? Get a baseline, retest. I think getting a baseline is important, right? But just with any other test or your hormones, you're not testing those ones and saying, oh, okay, they're out of range, they're in range, I'm good, or I'm going to take this. You need to understand the change and you need to document that change in between. So, we want to get a baseline at any time, and then we really want to repeat about every six months or so.
We have to wrap up. I'm just looking at the time. So, okay, let's talk about the practical part. So I've done this true diagnostic test and it was really simple. You just prick your finger, put it on a piece of paper, and then you ship it out. And in several weeks you get your data, which was amazing. And I really like it. But let's let's talk about the cost because since then it's changed, prices have changed. How much is, and I you have several kits as well now too, since.
Yeah. The all comprehensive one is $4.99. So I recommend doing that one if cost isn't ever an issue, but then you can retest if, you're like, it's too much, which it is a big lift, do the cheaper kit, in between at the 6 month mark, and that's $229. And I know Zora, you have your discount too. So listeners get a
Oh yeah.
pretty big discount too, if they go through you.
Yeah, that's right. I think the code is Zora. If not, it's
Mhm.
Hack My Age. I'll have it in the show notes. It's got to be one of the two, but I should have written that down. I totally forgot. But yeah, definitely can get a discount. And if you are in the biohacking menopause group, you may win a free kit. So jump on in. I'll have a link to that too. And we also have special offers. We're going to have several of them for a lower price of 150. And you're going to hear about that. So jump in quickly. And so before I let you go, is there anything that you'd like to tell us about your podcast? I just found that out and I didn't realize that you've got a podcast on, and it's called Everything Epigenetics. And anything coming up there or any news in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have some new reports, coming out. We have this symphony age kind of biological age clock, which can tell you the aging of 11 different organ systems. So that'll be coming through TruDiagnostic within the next month. But it's yeah, I have my podcast season 2 is about to come out soon on everything epigenetics. I do a journal club Friday every week on Instagram, really diving into some of the research on epigenetics, a lot of women related research as well. I think that needs really more light and more attention, and have a monthly newsletter too. So also happy to just chat with anyone and continue the conversation. So if there's anything anyone's interested in or wants to learn a little bit more about, just shoot me a message.
Cool. Now, and one thing I forgot to ask about true diagnostic testing is there's a follow-up explanation for this, or is this something they go to their doctor for?
Yeah, we'd usually recommend healthcare provider, right? Their specialty. This is their specialty, the ones that we work with. But I'm happy to do a report review with anyone who purchases using your code as well for no cost.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's
Yeah, of
amazing.
course.
Oh, that's a huge because that can cost several $100s for people to go to their doctor and get this interpreted. So I appreciate that. And I will certainly leave the code and where to buy this. So the last thing I wanted to ask too is because a lot of you got your data that from the research. So I know you're very young, but do you have any last words for a woman going through the menopause transition?
Yeah, I think, just navigating that, I would just give yourself some kindness, right? Remember, it's a natural phase of life, right? It can come with its own set of challenges and opportunities. Just treat it as an opportunity, right? To learn more about yourself, more about your body. Important to really focus on what you can control and nourishing your own body with healthy food, staying active, again, keeping connected. That's why I love your channel so much, Dora, too. You're bringing a lot of education and awareness and community to this as well. I think that's really, really important. So just about, rediscovering yourself and prioritizing your well-being and knowing you're not alone on that journey. Tons of really cool resources and communities available to support people. So I think you can look at it as, oh, I'm going through all these changes in a negative light, which can affect your epigenetics negatively, right? If you're changing your mindset and using it as an opportunity to learn, I think you'll have that'll be reflected even in the biological age results.
Yes, we covered it all, actually. We know what to do now. So everyone can find you on everythingepigenetics.com. They can get a test kit at TruDiagnostic.com. You've got your Instagram, which is also Everything Epigenetics, and your contact email. And I will have links to all of this in the show notes. And you guys join before August 1st, I think. No, join before August 31st, 2024 to get a hold of a chance to win a free kit or a very, very discounted price. But if you can't wait, you just go to the link and we'll take care of you there. So thank you so much, Hannah, for a wonderful conversation and have a wonderful day.
Amazing. Thanks, Zora. I appreciate you.